I never expected to become a farmer at 35. But when that certified letter arrived claiming the HOA owned mineral rights to my grandfather's land, I knew something wasn't right. Especially when I discovered their president had forged documents while Grandpa was in the hospital. How would I stand up against a powerful HOA determined to steal my family's farm right out from under me? Comment below where you're watching from. I stared at the certified letter in my hands, my coffee growing cold beside me. This must be a mistake, I whispered to the empty kitchen.
The paper trembled slightly as he read it again.
According to the Sycamore Heights Homeowners Association, they owned all mineral rights to my grandfather's farm, my farm now, and planned to start digging up my land in just 4 weeks. Grandpa's funeral was barely 2 months ago. After he passed, I'd left my cramped apartment and soul-crushing accounting job in the city to take over his 15-acre property in Willow Creek. The farm had been in our family for 3 generations. I'd spent every childhood summer here, helping him tend the peach orchard, gathering eggs and learning how the land breathes with the seasons. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. After being transferred 3 times, a clipped voice answered, Margaret Holloway speaking. HOA President.
MS HOA.
I'm calling about this letter claiming your association owns mineral rights to my property. There must be some confusion.
No confusión a tal, Michi.
Your grandfather signed the agreement 2 years ago. Our geological survey found significant limestone deposits beneath your eastern field. The excavation begins next month. The paperwork is quite clear. My grandfather would never. Perhaps you didn't know him as well as you thought. She interrupted. The agreement is legally binding. Good day. I sat stunned as she hung up outside my kitchen window. Morning light spilled across the fields Grandpa had worked his entire life. He taught me everything about this land, how to read the soil, when to plant, which trees needed extra care. He'd sooner cut off his own hand than sign away any part of this farm. That afternoon, I drove to the edge of my property where it bordered Sycamore Heights. The development was only 5 years old. Rows of identical 2-story houses with perfect lawns and identical mailboxes. So different from the weathered beauty of Grandpa's my farmhouse. A woman was gardening in the yard closest to my fence line. She straightened when she saw me approach. You must be Tom's grandson, she said, pulling off her gloves.
I'm Elaine Watson.
I'm so sorry about your grandfather. He was a wonderful neighbor. Did you know him well? I asked. As well as anyone, I suppose. He brought me fresh peaches every summer. Her eyes darted to her front door before she added in a lower voice. Be careful with that.
HOA.
Margaret's had her eye on your property since they broke ground here. What do you mean?
Elaine glanced around again.
She's always talking about expanding the community footprint. Your grandfather refused to sell even when they offered him well above market value. A car door slammed nearby. Elaine quickly put her gardening gloves back on.
I'll get back to my flowers.
The HOA only allows certain approved plants. Got cited last month for unauthorized hostess. She forced a laugh. As I walked back toward my house, a silver SUV cruised slowly past. The driver, a stern-faced woman with immaculate gray hair, stared at me with undisguised interest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out Grandpa's old metal filing cabinet and started digging through decades of paperwork, tax forms, equipment receipts, seed catalogs, nothing about mineral rights. Around 2 a.m., I found a folder labeled Property Documents containing the original deed from 1963 when my grandfather bought the place from the Wilson family. I read every line carefully. The deed explicitly stated that all mineral rights conveyed with the property with no provisions for separation. According to this, no one but the property owner could claim those rights. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. The clerk, an older man named Frank with reading glasses perched on his nose, helped me search through property records. Here's the original deed, he said, pointing to a document that matched what I'd found in Grandpa's cabinet. And here's the property tax history, building permits, boundary adjustments when they put in the county road in '87. What about any transfer of mineral rights? I asked. Frank adjusted his glasses.
Let me check.
That's odd. He turned his computer screen so I could see it. There is a mineral rights transfer filed 2 years ago. Signed by Thomas Mitchell.
Transferring al subsurface rights to the Sycamore Oaks Community Development Corporation.
My stomach dropped. Can I see the actual document? Frank printed a copy. There it was, a legal-looking document with what appeared to be my grandfather's signature at the bottom. Dated April 15, 2022. But something felt wrong. I studied the signature closely. Do you have any other documents my grandfather signed on file? For comparison, Frank found a property tax appeal from 5 years ago. When he laid the documents side by side, I could see subtle differences in the signatures. Grandpa's distinctive looping T was missing from the mineral rights transfer.
As he drove home, my phone rang.
It was my Aunt Susan, Grandpa's youngest sister. I got your message, she said, about Grandpa supposedly signing over mineral rights. Did he ever mention anything about it to you? Never. And Tom, there's something else you should know. I was looking through my calendar from that time. April 15, 2022. That's when the document was supposedly signed, right? Yes. Your grandfather was in the hospital then. He had his stroke on April 2nd and wasn't released until the 27th. He couldn't even hold a pen for weeks afterward. I visited him every day. There's no way he signed anything on the 15th. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The signature is forged. It has to be. What are you going to do? I pulled into my driveway and stared at the farmhouse. Golden light bathed the porch where Grandpa and I had shelled peas and watched fireflies on summer evenings. Whatever it takes, I said. This farm stays in our family. As the sun set, I noticed a drone hovering over my eastern field. The area where the HOA claimed valuable limestone deposits existed. When I walked toward it, the drone quickly retreated towards Sycamore Heights. They were watching me, planning their move. But now I knew something they didn't. Their claim was based on a forgery. The question was, how could I prove it before their bulldozers arrived in less than 4 weeks? My truck skidded to a halt as I spotted 2 men in hard hats placing surveying stakes along my eastern field. I jumped out, heart pounding against my ribs. What do you think you're doing on my property? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady.
The tallerman barely glanced up.
HOA contracted us to mark the excavation zones. We have permits. He waved a clipboard dismissively. I never agreed to any excavation, I said, stepping closer.
This land belongs to me. Take it up with the Homeowners Association, buddy.
We're just doing our job. I pulled out my phone. Then you won't mind if I call Sheriff Davis to verify those permits? The men exchanged looks. We'll come back when the paperwork's sorted, the shorter one muttered. They gathered their equipment and retreated to their truck. As they drove away, my elderly neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, hobbled across his adjacent field, leaning heavily on his walking stick. Saw you run those fellas off, he called.
Good for you.
Those Sycamore Heights people think they own the whole county. Mr. Jenkins, did you know my grandfather well?
50 years man and boy.
He nodded. Best neighbor a person could ask for. Did he ever mention selling mineral rights to the HOA? Jenkins snorted. Tom would never. That Margaret Holloway's been scheming to get her hands on his land. Your land now since they first broke ground on that development. Offered him a fortune. He told her he'd rather eat dirt than sell to her kind. Then why would she claim he signed it over? Because she's ruthless, Jenkins said, tapping his cane for emphasis. Her husband's the biggest developer in 3 counties. They bulldoze anything in their way. Buildings, people, laws. That night, I called every lawyer in the county. None would take my case. Conflict of interest, they all said, though none specified what that conflict might be. I turned to the internet, researching property law, until my eyes burned. By dawn, I understood I needed 3 things: proof the signature was forged, evidence of who forged it, and leverage to fight back against the HOA's resources. At the county clerk's office the next day, I requested copies of every document related to my property and the Sycamore Heights development. Frank, the helpful clerk, raised his eyebrows at the size of my request. "Looking for something specific?" he asked. "Evidence," I replied. While the copies were being made, I visited the hospital where Grandpa had been treated. The records department confirmed he was an inpatient from April 2nd to 27th, 2022. His physical therapy notes specifically mentioned he had no grip strength in his right hand, his writing hand until mid-May. Armed with hospital records, I returned to collect my stack of documents from Frank. "Found something interesting while pulling these," he said quietly, glancing around the empty office. The mineral rights transfer wasn't notarized by any of our regular notaries.
Signature belongs to a Judith Holloway. My pulse quicken. Any relation to Margaret Holloway?
Frank nodded. Her sister-in-law works in the development office. Between you and me, there have been whispers about those two and some questionable paperwork before. As I drove home, my phone rang with an unknown number.
Mr. Michi, this is Sarah Thompson from 445 Sycamore Lane.
We've never met, but I saw you talking to Elaine yesterday. A bunch of us homeowners are meeting tonight to discuss the HOA's latest activities. We thought you might want to join us. The address she gave was for a coffee shop in the next town over. When I arrived that evening, I found 7 people waiting in a back room. Sarah, a young woman with bright eyes and a determined expression, introduced herself with a firm handshake. "We all have problems with how Margaret runs things," she explained. "But what she's doing to your farm crosses a line." "How did you know about my situation?" I asked. A man with salt and pepper hair stood up. "I'm James Rodriguez, retired attorney. Margaret announced at the last meeting that they'd acquired mineral rights to expand the community. She's pushing through a special assessment $1,200 zero per household for legal fees and site preparation. Most homeowners don't even know what it's for. She's targeting you specifically," added a woman named Diane. "Last month, she had the Rules Committee pass a provision against agricultural odors crossing property lines. Said it would decrease property values. And she's been photographing your property," Sarah said, claimed she needed evidence of code violations, but wouldn't specify which codes.
"Y spread out my documents on the table."
"My grandfather never signed those mineral rights away. He was hospitalized when this document was supposedly signed. The signature is forged, and I believe Margaret and her sister-in-law Judith are behind it."
James studied the papers.
"This is criminal fraud."
"Have you gone to the sheriff?"
"Not yet."
"I wanted more evidence first."
James nodded. "Smart. Margaret's husband plays golf with Sheriff Davis every Sunday. You'll need irrefutable proof before approaching law enforcement." "What about challenging the HOA directly?" asked a younger man named Michael. "Too risky," Sarah replied. "Remember what happened to the Patels when they disputed their fencing violation? Margaret's husband had the building inspector find structural concerns in their new addition. Cost them thousands.
"Iravd my dies."
"So, what can I do? Their bulldozers arrive in 3 weeks."
James leaned forward. "You need 3 things.
Solid documentation of the fraud, public awareness so they can't easily retaliate, and expert testimony that challenges their claim about limestone deposits. I have a friend who teaches geology at the state university. I said he could analyze soil samples." "Perfect." James nodded. "Meanwhile, I can reach out to former colleagues about the forgery angle. We'll need a handwriting expert." Sarah pulled out her laptop and I can help with the public awareness. I run a local blog with decent readership.
"If we document everything, they can silence all of us."
For the first time since receiving that certified letter, I felt hope. I wasn't alone anymore. As we left the coffee shop, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Wait, she whispered, pointing to a sedan parked across the street. A woman with perfectly coiffed grey hair sat inside, pretending to check her phone. That's Margaret.
We ducked back inside.
She followed me here. I realized she knows we're organizing. This changes our timeline, James said grimly. If Margaret knows we're challenging her, she might accelerate her plans. What should we do? Sarah asked. I thought about Grandpa, about his weathered hands working that land for decades. About the promise I'd made to keep the farm in our family. We fight back, I said. First thing tomorrow, I'm calling my geologist friend. If there's no valuable limestone on my property, why is Margaret so desperate to get her hands on it? What's she really after? None of us noticed the small red light blinking in the coffee shop's corner. A security camera capturing our entire meeting. Streaming directly to a computer in Margaret Holloway's home office. I jumped at the knock on my door. It was almost 9:00 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw a woman about my age nervously glancing over her shoulder. I'm Sarah Thompson, she said when I opened up. I live in the house with the blue shutters that backs up to your east field. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I need to talk to you about the HOA. They're not just after your land. They're making all our lives a nightmare. I invited her in, offering fresh-picked peach tea. Sarah's story poured out between sips. Margaret Holloway ran the Sycamore Heights HOA like a personal kingdom. Sarah had planted native wildflowers to help local bees. The next day, Margaret slapped her with a $500 fine. When I showed her the approved plant list that included wildflowers, she just laughed. Sarah said, her hands shaking slightly. She told me the board had changed the rules last month. When I asked to see the new rules, she threatened to put a lien on my house if I didn't pay up within 48 hours. I pulled out the forged document with my grandfather's signature. Look at this. April 15th last year. My grandfather was in the hospital after a stroke. He couldn't even hold a spoon, let alone sign his name.
Sarah's eyes widened.
You know, you're not the only one with a story. My neighbor Tom found out they've been charging us all for landscaping services on the north side walking path. But that path doesn't exist. 2 nights later, my kitchen table was surrounded by 7 neighbors from Sycamore Heights. Each person carried their own grievances against Margaret. Excessive fines, weird rule changes, and money that disappeared from the HOA accounts. Last month, they collected $15,000 for a playground renovation, said Elaine, a kindergarten teacher. The only renovation was a fresh coat of paint on the old swing set. Where did the rest go? James Rodriguez, a retired attorney with thick glasses and carefully combed gray hair, studied my documents, his finger traced over my grandfather's supposed signature. This is textbook fraud, he said, looking up at me. The problem is proving it in court. Margaret's brother-in-law sits on the county commission. They've gotten away with shady deals before because they have friends in high places. Rain tapped against the windows as we outlined our battle plan. James would help me prepare a legal challenge. 3 others would dig into the HOA financial records. They had rights as members to request them. Sarah and Elaine would quietly talk to more neighbors building our support. We need to know why they really want this land. James said, I don't buy the limestone story. There must be something more valuable thereafter. I nodded, remembering something. I have a college friend, Professor Wilson, who teaches environmental geology. I'll ask her to check if there's actually anything valuable in the soil here.
We left my barn closet to midnight.
The rain had stopped, leaving the air sweet with the smell of wet earth. As my new allies headed to their cars, headlights suddenly flashed from down the road. A black sedan I didn't recognize.
Through the darkness, I caught the glint of binoculars.
When I started walking toward them, the car engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as it sped away. What was that? Sarah asked, freezing in place.
A chill ran up my spine. Someone watching us.
We need to be careful. Margaret has eyes everywhere. Do you think they heard our plans?
Elaine whispered.
I don't know, I admitted, but we need to move fast. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my grandfather's old porch swing, thinking about how he'd fought in 2 wars to protect his country, only to have his land stolen through lies while he lay in a hospital bed. The anger burning in my chest hardened into determination. I wouldn't just fight back, I would win. I didn't know then how quickly Margaret would strike or how dirty she was willing to play. By sunrise, our rebellion would face its first real test.
James, words kept echoing in my head.
They want something on this land, something worth committing fraud for. But what could be so valuable that they'd risk criminal charges? What was Margaret Holloway really after? As first light broke over the eastern fields, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emergency HOA meeting called for tonight. Topic: security measures for neighborhood boundaries.
Something's happening.
Be ready. I stared out at my grandfather's land.
The dew-covered fields shimmering in the downlight.
Whatever game Margaret was playing, she had just made her next move. And somehow I needed to be 2 steps ahead of her. The question wasn't if they would strike back, but when and how hard. I slammed on my brakes, mouth hanging open. A huge chain and padlock secured my front gate with a bright orange notice plastered across it. Property access restricted pending mineral excavation preparations. 2 burly men in matching black uniforms stood beside a shiny black SUV, arms crossed. "Excuse me," I called out, stepping from my truck. "This is my property. You need to remove that lock right now."
The taller guard barely glanced at me.
"We have orders from the Sycamore Heights Homeowners Association. No entry without proper authorization."
Authorization?
"I own this farm." My voice cracked as anger surged through me. "Take it up with Ms. Holloway," the second guard said, handing me a business card. "We're just doing our job." I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Sheriff Martinez. While waiting, I paced the dusty road, watching these strangers block me from my own home, from the fields my grandfather had worked for 50 years. 20 minutes later, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, gravel crunching under its tires. Sheriff Martinez, a stocky man with kind eyes that looked everywhere but at me, reviewed the paperwork the guards handed him. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice low. "They filed the proper documents yesterday. According to this, they have legal access rights for surveying." Based on a forged signature, I protested. The sheriff sighed, "That's for a court to decide. For now, these papers are in order." He must have seen the devastation on my face because he added quietly, "Get yourself a good lawyer fast, and I'd suggest you document everything. Then I need a copy of all that paperwork." I insisted. The guards reluctantly made copies with a portable scanner from their SUV. I spent the day in my truck watching strangers walk freely on my land while I couldn't even check on my chickens or water my vegetables. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from my new allies. Sarah emergency meeting was a disaster. Margaret announced a $2,000 special assessment from each house for legal expenses for the mineral project. Elaine. She went ballistic when people asked questions. Said anyone who didn't pay would face immediate fines.
James, we recorded everything.
She mentioned your grandfather willingly signing over rights. Got her lying on tape. As darkness fell, I finally saw headlights approaching Professor Wilson's ancient Subaru. She rolled down her window, her gray curls bouncing as she nodded toward the guards. "Your friends told me what happened. Got room in that truck for an old geologist with bad knees. We stayed up late planning our next move." The guards changed shifts at midnight and the night crew seemed less interested in their job. Professor Wilson sketched a rough map of my property. "We need soil samples from these 5 areas," she explained. "If they're claiming valuable limestone deposits, we need proof of what's actually there." At dawn, while the night guards dozed in their SUV, we slipped through a gap in the fence far from the main gate. With spades and collection tubes, we quickly gathered samples from different parts of my land. My heart pounded the entire time, expecting shouts or sirens, but we made it back undetected. By afternoon, Professor Wilson had completed her tests in the mobile lab she'd brought in her car. She pushed her glasses up her nose, frowning at the results. "There's nothing special about this soil," she declared. "Completely ordinary agricultural land with standard limestone content that you'd find anywhere in this county."
I stared at her.
So they're lying about the mineral deposits. Why go through all this trouble for regular farmland? The answer came that evening. James called, excitement making his voice crack. "I found something in the county development plan that wasn't publicly announced yet. There's a proposed highway exit that would connect directly to Sycamore Heights. It would increase property values by at least 30% overnight. What does that have to do with my farm?" I asked. "The only viable route for this exit would see you T through what's currently your eastern field, the part that borders Sarah's backyard. They need your land for road access, not minerals."
Suddenly, it all made sense.
This wasn't about limestone. It was about money. Millions in increased property values. Margaret stood to make a fortune on her own 3 investment properties in Sycamore Heights, plus whatever kickbacks she might get from developers. "How do we fight this?" I asked, my mind racing. "We go public," James said firmly.
Local news, social media, everything. Margaret wants to operate in the shadows.
"Let's drag this whole scheme into the light." That night, we crafted our plan. Sarah contacted her cousin who worked at the local TV station. James prepared legal documents challenging the forged mineral rights transfer. I gathered old photos of my grandfather working the land, including ones from April 2022, showing him in his hospital bed, clearly unable to sign anything. As I finally fell into an exhausted sleep on my friend's couch since I still couldn't access my own house, my phone pinged with one last message from Elaine. "Margaret just sent an email. Construction crews arriving Monday to begin preliminary excavation on your eastern field. We only have 4 days to stop this. 4 days to save my grandfather's legacy. 4 days to expose a fraud that reached into the county government itself." The odds seemed impossible. But as I drifted off to sleep, I remembered something my grandfather used to say. The tallest oak in the forest was once just a little nut that held its ground. It was time to hold my ground, and Margaret Holloway had no idea what she was really up against.
My hands shook as he unlocked the chains he had secretly put around my tractor last night.
The security guards watching my farm hadn't noticed me sneaking out before dawn. I climbed up, started the engine, and drove straight toward my padlocked front gate, where news vans were already gathering. "That's far enough," yelled one guard, rushing forward with his hand up. I cut the engine and stood up on the tractor seat. "This is my property, and today everyone will learn the truth." Camera crews pointed their equipment my way as I held up folders of evidence. Neighbors from Sycamore Heights gathered behind the reporters, many holding homemade signs saying HOA fraud and support local farms. 4 weeks, the Sycamore Heights HOA has claimed they own mineral rights to my family farm. I called out loudly. They locked me out of parts of my own land. They threatened me with legal action. But I've discovered what they're really after. I spread a large county map across my tractor hood. This isn't about limestone deposits. It's about this proposed highway exit that would make their properties worth millions more, but only if they can steal my eastern field. A black SUV screeched to a halt and Margaret Holloway stormed out, her face red as a tomato. She wore an expensive suit and looked ready for battle. "Turn those cameras off right now," she demanded. "This man is trespassing on HOA property." "Actually," came a voice from the crowd. "He's standing on his own land." Professor Wilson stepped forward in his tweed jacket. "I've completed extensive soil testing. There are no valuable mineral deposits here, just regular farmland. The HOA's geological survey is completely fabricated." Margaret's eyes darted around, noticing how many of her own HOA members were present. "We have legal documentation of the mineral rights transfer. His grandfather signed it." I jumped down from the tractor on April 15 last year when he was in hospital after a stroke. When doctors confirmed he couldn't even hold a pen, I pulled out hospital records and handed copies to reporters. That's not just a lie, Ms. Holloway. That's criminal forgery.
Whispers spread through the crowd.
A local news reporter thrust a microphone toward Margaret. Miss Holloway, how do you respond to these forgery allegations? This is absurd. I never, she stammered, backing toward her SUV. James Rodriguez, the retired attorney, stepped forward with more papers. We've obtained bank records showing HOA funds were transferred to a private account to pay for this scheme. Nearly $200,000 is missing from the association's accounts. Sarah Thompson moved to the front of the crowd. As residents, we never approved this. The board never even told us about it. Sheriff Martinez's patrol car pulled up, followed by 2 deputies. Margaret saw them and suddenly lunged toward me, jabbing a finger in my face.
You stupid farmer.
Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? My brother-in-law runs this county. The sheriff approached slowly. Not anymore, he doesn't. Commissioner Holloway resigned this morning after we shared evidence with the Ethics Committee. Margaret's face drained of color. This is a mistake. I can explain everything. You'll have plenty of time for that. Sheriff Martinez said, nodding to his deputies. Margaret Holloway, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement of HOA funds. As the deputies led her toward their car, she twisted around. You'll never win. Our lawyers will bury you. This farm will be bulldozed by summer. I watched calmly as they drove away, but my heart was pounding. The reporters swarmed around me asking questions, and neighbors came to shake my hand. We had won this battle, but Margaret's threats weren't empty. Her family had deep pockets and powerful friends. That night, as I finally returned to my farmhouse, Sarah called with disturbing news. Someone broke into the HOA office and took all the financial records, she said, her voice shaking. And I just drove past your orchard. There's a bulldozer parked at the edge of your property. I looked out my window into the darkness. Headlights appeared on my private drive, moving slowly toward my house. 1 vehicle, then 3 more behind it. They're not waiting for the courts, I whispered into the phone. They're coming now. I grabbed my shotgun from above the fireplace and loaded it with birdshot, not to hurt anyone, but to make noise if needed. My hands were steady now, for vehicles crawled up my driveway, headlights cutting through the darkness.
Sarah, he whispered into the phone.
Call Sheriff Martinez and every neighbor who supported us today.
Tell them what's happening.
I stepped onto my porch as the vehicles formed a half circle in my yard. But instead of hired thugs, out stepped James, Professor Wilson, and about 15 Sycamore Heights residents. They carried flashlights, shovels, and determined expressions. We heard about the bulldozer, James said. We're not letting them destroy your farm tonight.
Relief washed over me.
Thank you. But why the sneaky approach? Margaret's husband posted bail an hour ago, Sarah explained, climbing out of her car. We didn't want them to see us gathering. We hiked to the orchard's edge where a massive yellow bulldozer sat ominously near my property line. 2 men loitered nearby smoking cigarettes. That's Margaret's nephew and his friend, whispered a neighbor. They work for a construction company.
Professor Wilson stepped forward. Gentlemen, this is private property and you're trespassing.
The men jumped, startled by our group emerging from the darkness. We're just following orders.
The taller one stammered.
Mrs. Holloway said this land is HOA property now.
Court records say different.
James replied, holding up legal papers that glowed in our flashlight beams. And destroying property during a legal dispute is criminal. More headlights appeared. 3 police cruisers with flashing lights. The men scrambled into a pickup truck and sped away, leaving the bulldozer behind. Sheriff Martinez examined the abandoned equipment. He's still in it. They were definitely planning something tonight. He radioed for a tow truck. I'll have deputies watching your property until this case is settled. That night marked the beginning of round-the-clock community protection. Neighbors took shifts watching my farm. Lawyers offered free services. A local newspaper ran a front-page story about the HOA's attempted land grab. 3 weeks later, we got our day in court. Margaret and her husband arrived in matching designer outfits, flanked by expensive attorneys. I wore my cleanest work shirt and sat beside James and Sarah. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair, listened as both sides presented evidence. When Margaret's lawyer claimed I was blocking legitimate development, I presented Grandpa's original deed with its mineral rights provisions. Furthermore, I added, showing certified medical records. My grandfather was physically incapable of signing anything on the date shown on their document. The forgery expert's testimony was devastating. He pointed out 6 inconsistencies between Grandpa's real signature and the fake one. Margaret's face grew paler with each detail. "Your Honor," her lawyer interjected. Even if there were irregularities in the paperwork, the Sycamore Heights community would benefit tremendously from this development. That's when Sarah stood up. As elected president of the new Sycamore Heights HOA board, I can state that our community opposes the scheme. We've filed separate charges for the missing funds. The judge's ruling was clear. My ownership was valid. The mineral rights document was fraudulent, and Margaret and 2 former board members would face criminal charges. Outside the courthouse, reporters thrust microphones at me. What happens now to the development plans? I looked at Sarah and the neighbors who had become friends. We have better plans. Over the next 6 months, everything was different. Margaret and her husband sold their house and moved away while awaiting trial. The county transportation department, embarrassed by their connection to the scheme, invited community input on new highway plans. I hired an architect to design something special. A combined farmers market and community center on a small piece of my land nearest to Sycamore Heights. Neighbors volunteered weekends to help build it, working alongside me in the dirt. By spring, we had established the Willow Creek Community Farm Initiative. I taught gardening classes. Kids from the development came after school to help tend animals. Weekend markets drew visitors from across the county.
A path wound from the development through my eastern field.
Past gardens where families rented plots to grow vegetables. The field Margaret had coveted most became the place that connected us all. One Saturday, as I sold fresh peaches at our market, I spotted an unfamiliar face, Commissioner Taylor, who had replaced Margaret's brother-in-law. "I've been watching what you've created here," she said, looking around at the bustling market. "The county is revising its rural preservation policies. Would you consider serving on our advisory board?" That afternoon, Mr. Jenkins sat with me on my porch, watching children chase butterflies in the meadow where bulldozers nearly destroyed everything. "Your grandfather fought developers 3 times over the years," he revealed, sipping lemonade. "He always said this land had a purpose beyond money." I nodded, understanding now what he meant. The HOA had claimed they owned rights to what lay beneath my soil. But they missed what was truly valuable, the connections growing on its surface. The highway eventually came, but with an exit plan that preserved my farm and actually improved access to our community market. Property values in Sycamore Heights rose higher than Margaret's plan would have achieved. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. In trying to steal my land through deception and bullying, the HOA had accidentally created something far more precious than they had imagined. They thought mineral rights were valuable, but community proved priceless.